Hey, Vladimir, thank you so much for making yourself available.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you very much.
You are so welcome. You are Dr. Vladimir Brovkin. You are a retired professor of politics from Harvard and lots of other fine places with a specialism, I think, in Russian history.
Yes, yes, indeed, yes.
Okay. And also contemporary politics, including Russian contemporary geopolitics.
Yes, exactly.
Okay,
Exactly.
great. And I'm going to have the links where people can find you, find your YouTube channel and your X, although I don't think you're very active on X because I did have a look there. But you
No,
do,
no, not on X. Occasionally, but not full time. No.
yes, but mostly on your YouTube channel where you post,
Yes.
I think, really um, considered analysis, which is so rare nowadays because it's just like, oh, you're just a Russian asset, or Putin made me do this.
Oh,
I just,
yes, yes.
yeah, I just want to say,
All the time.
Did Putin make you come here this morning for this conversation?
No, no,
No, okay,
no.
just checking, because he makes people do lots of things. It's Thursday, the 5th of February at 10 minutes past 8 as I speak, UK time. Okay, so Vladimir, we hear a lot about Russia, how cruel and evil Putin is, that he's a genocidal dictator, that
Yes,
Russia invaded Ukraine unprovoked, and Russia's going to attack all of Europe, and
yes, all
uh,
that kind of stuff.
all
Yes.
that kind of stuff, right? So, I don't know, give us another perspective that
Yes,
isn't
I'm very happy
out of
to
the
do that.
pages of the Financial Times or the Guardian.
Yeah, let me put it this way. For most people who don't know Russia, the easiest way to think about a country is to identify its pivotal or crucial events that shape the future of that country for a long time, for decades in some cases. So, in the case of modern Russia, that event would be the 1990s. This is the time when the Soviet Union collapsed. And this is very important to understand. Just imagine in your country, the country collapses, it just splits into pieces, the government collapses, there is no law and order, there are criminal gangs all over the place, inflation goes through the roof, and the life savings disappear. People really have to understand what Russia went through in the 1990s in order to see what's happening now and make some comparisons. I always give this example which really illustrates what happened. My aunt in Russia, she was a quite well-known doctor, very well known. There are kids that came to her from all over the Soviet Union, and she was making the highest salary at that time which was possible in the Soviet Union, which was 500 rubles a month. Now, for 5,000 rubles, one could buy a car in 1989. That's what it cost, 5,000 rubles. Now, 3 years later, in 1992, for 5,000 rubles, one could buy a chicken. That's it. So there was complete collapse of currency. Life savings disappeared. It was hyperinflation, like in Germany in the 1922. It was devastating. The salaries were not paid. My wife, whom I met in 2000, she was a teacher in school, and they just didn't pay. They didn't pay any salary at all. And when they did, it was $20 a month. This was enough to buy potatoes and live just basically semi-starving. This is why many people started going to Turkey to buy clothes and bring it back to Russia. People did all kinds of things just to survive. Yes.
I mean, I remember reading about it and listening about it at the time. I used to listen to the BBC World Service a lot then for my sins. Please forgive me. But
Yeah.
hearing about what was going on and how people were living and stuff. And I wonder, because one of the things that I think is inevitable at some point in the European Union and Britain is a similar financial collapse where the pound becomes almost worthless before becoming worthless. How do people get by if all you get is $20 a month and a chicken is 5,000 rubles? How do people manage to feed
Well,
themselves?
that's
And
what I'm
why do
saying.
they go to work?
It was a very, very hard time. people went all kinds of things. Some people started growing plots in their gardens. Some people went to different parts of the Soviet Union. Some people started the shuttling business. They would go to Turkey, bring some cheap stuff, and to China, to various other places. When I came there on an exchange professor in 2000, in the year 2000, it was already much better by 2000. But none of these professors that I worked with had one job. They kept on their job at the university, which paid $200 or $300 a month. But then then they also had private courses and tutoring and all kinds of. Some people worked as taxi drivers. I mean, anybody did whatever they could to survive. So this was a very hard time. But that's not all. On top of it, there was a government that was totally corrupt. By the way, I describe all this in my book, From Vladimir Lenin to Vladimir Putin, which is a survey of Russian history for 100 years. And there is a chapter on the 1990s. But Yeltsin was mostly drunk, and he was manipulated by a bunch of oligarchs that are no longer oligarchs. And these oligarchs were shoveling money to the Western banks. They were selling off the pieces of a broken Russian industry and then buying palaces in Britain, like Abramovich, who is still a British citizen, who stole billions from under the Yeltsin's cover. And so the entrepreneurial class at the very top, they were thieves. They were former KGB operators who were now in business and selling off Russian industry. One couldn't think of a less patriotic business class as the one in Russia in the 1990s. And then, by all kinds of political tricks, Putin rose to the top. I explain it also, and there is a video how Putin comes to power. If people look at my playlist, which is called Russia under Yeltsin and Putin. But briefly, what happened was that he was working in the Sobchak administration of St. Petersburg, and he was very popular. Sobchak was, one of those so-called democratic leaders. And then he had a patron of Primakov, who was a chief of the FSB, which was a successor organization to KGB. And they needed somebody who was clean. And that was Putin, because he was in foreign intelligence. A lot of Western media says, oh, Putin, the former KGB. KGB was a huge organization together with domestic foreign. It was like an FBI and CIA put together. So he was in foreign intelligence, not in the KGB that was persecuting dissidents. So he was brought in, and he became the director of FSB, and Primakov became a prime minister. So this was the launching pad for Putin to be at the inner circle of the highest ranking officials in 1997.
Okay, now you say Putin was clean. What do you mean by that? Because what we get from The Guardian and the BBC, right, is how corrupt he is and how he's stolen billions and he's secreted them away.
All this is nonsense. This is all lies. This is ridiculous.
Now, has Putin made you say that?
No. I look. Let me tell you. If you go to my publications of the 1990s,
Yes.
I was one of the staunchest critics of Russia. I was, and before that, at Harvard, I had a reputation of the most ardent anti-communist, who was just exposing the crimes of Stalin and Brezhnev and all these apparatchiks and so forth. In the 1990s, I was. And the BBC was quoting me, and I had an interview with ABC, and they were afraid for my life because I was exposing the crimes of these thugs and oligarchs. Putin turned things around, and that is the point. In 2016, I wrote an article, Vladimir the Savior. He really turned things around and I describe it again in my book, how first he put restraints on the oligarchs. His message to the oligarchs was, if you shut up and don't involve in politics, you can keep your money. If you get involved in politics, you're out. And this was done with Gusinsky, who he basically put in prison, and then he let him out. And now he's one of those, and Khodorkovsky as well. But those who didn't involve in politics, and such as Deripaska in aluminum industry and a couple of others, they're still there. And the communists are still accusing Putin that he let the thieves keep their stolen goods. That's, if you look at Russian domestic politics, they still say all these oligarchs should be arrested and hanged or imprisoned or whatever. Now, Putin wants to have peace in the country. He doesn't want another turmoil. This is probably why he let those thieves stay and keep, because Putin wants the West to understand that the property rights are really for serious now. There's not going to be another confiscation or nationalization or any one of those things. So he has kept the stability. And another important thing about Putin, which people should understand, Putin, when he came to power, why he came to power was because he combined the support of three important social groups. On the one hand, he was a westernizer, which means he welcomed foreign investment, and he was friends, real buddies with Berlusconi, with Schroeder, with Chirac. He wanted to have good relations with Western Europe, and he invited business. With Schroeder, he concluded this agreement on building Nord Stream 1, Nord Stream 2. German and Western flooded into Russia, was building factories. BMW opened the factory, and Volkswagen opened the factory. It was really, that was his one. So he signaled to the Russian businessmen, you want to do business? Plenty of opportunities. Go to joint ventures, do it. So he got the support of the business community with the message, don't mess up with me in politics. Do business, not politics. The second thing he did, he put a restraint on the governors, which was another big problem. Trump has this problem now. The governors are, in Russia, unlike in America, they are like little kings. They basically are dukes who control their province, and they could do whatever they want there. All the businesses, and then the corrupt ones, all the local businesses pay them a cut. And they were basically like a mafia for example, in the year 2000. Now, Putin turned it around in delicate, very interesting ways. First, he put he sent the federal representatives. Then he changed the election procedure, because people think once you have election, everything's fine. No, elections are so easy to manipulate. You just build a kindergarten here, and then you say, "Well, guys, vote for me," and they will. It's very easy to please a constituency and then have your votes there. Like California is now a one-party communist state. Nothing ever changes. It's a one-party state, and they put in whoever they want, and you can put a horse or a donkey like in a Roman Senate, and they will vote for it, because that's the way things are set up in California. It's guaranteed election, no matter which name, Johnny, whoever is going to be elected. So this is why Putin changed it completely. And I know it because I taught in 2001 in the Urals, and it was like everything else, it was completely corrupt. But there was a kind of a struggle between the mayor and the governor, and exploiting these differences, Putin established a new system of elections, which is much, much better. I can't say there's no corruption now. There's always corruption. And I wrote a huge article about corruption in Russia, which is a separate matter. But he did change it for the better.
What were they like before the elections, and what are they like after his changes?
Well, his changes is he basically put in a watchdog, which is called a federal district, and the head of a federal district would supervise and kind of control the procedures in several provinces. So he would not have a commitment to one province; it will be several ones. And then the way that Putin has organized it is that the candidates to be governors are not actually selected by the local assemblies, because they would always put their own buddies in there. But it would be a complicated procedure, with half of the votes would come from the residents and the other half from the legislature, and that would be kind of monitored by the federal district. It's a very complex procedure, but the purpose of it was actually to empower the people to have a voice. For example, now in the United States, the people don't have a voice in terms of who is nominated to be the governor. It's usually the leading families and the business leaders, as they call them, or big corporations and their buddies. And if you look at the biographies of the governors, these are the ruling families for the last 200 years. Now, occasionally some foreigner breaks through, but normally it's a ruling class. Anyway, to get back to Russia, what I'm trying to say that the story is that he took care of the oligarchs. Then he put the restraints on the corruption of the governors. He introduced this huge foreign investment in these years of 2010, 11. Russia was growing like 5-6% a year. And this was a spectacular success. This is why in 2016 I wrote the article, Vladimir the Savior. Now, in foreign policy, the reason the British were particularly hard on him is because he did, I think that, I don't know, but it seems to me that that Russian intelligence service did liquidate a couple of spies who defected to Britain. They were former intelligence Russian, and then they defected, they betrayed Russia, and then they were wound up dead. Now, one can, argue whether the British was screaming, "This is a murder on British soil," blah, blah, blah. Okay, maybe it was. I don't know. But the point is that they did, sir, they were in Russian intelligence and they did defect. And it seems to me that if British intelligence officers defected to Russia and then MI6 killed them, nobody would particularly be worried about it, because that's what you get if you betray your country. Anyway, this is a separate story. We can discuss it in greater detail at some point. But I'm telling you the way to understand why Putin has 86% approval rating. It's not fake. It's not something that is forced on people. It's that Russia now, and listen to this, the Russians now live better than any time in their history. That's the point.
Wow.
The standard of living maybe is not as high as in the United States, but I live in France. I think the Russians live just about not worse than in France. It's everybody has a job. There's no unemployment, especially in the recent years because of the expansion of military industry. All the factories are working. People are making good money. There's amazing social services that he made, all kinds of benefits for mothers, for having more children. The churches are being built all over the place. There are new churches that are being built. The youth that used to be, like when I was there in 2000, they were very much pro-Western, in terms of like songs and soft culture, popular culture and things like that. Now it's very different. They're much more interested in Russian folk, and what I do is they play rock and roll based on Russian folk songs. In other words, it's sort of beginning to be more authentically Russian. For the first time in many years, Russians are proud to be Russians, and this is kind of amazing. This was not like this in 2000 when I was there. So there are many indicators that things are much better now than they were. Of course, all of that is marred by the war, because people are dying, and it's a sad, tragic story which we come back to. So this is not like everything's wonderful. But if we look at Russia before the war, like 2020, 2021, all these festivals and all these joyful atmosphere and revival of the churches and the families and birth rates. that means really Putin is the savior. Things turned around in Russia for the better.
Oh, thank you so much. That's absolutely fascinating. And what I've learned from listening to programs like the Duran and also Tom Luongo about Russia, at least what they say, Russia is self-sufficient in energy. It has tiny, tiny foreign debt, if any at all. So it has internal debt. The purchasing parity, of the ruble, is like one of the best in the world. So yeah, people earn less, but their money goes much further than say certainly in the UK or in Europe. They are self-sufficient in food. They don't allow any, pretty much, they don't allow any genetically modified crops. Russia's well respected. Putin's well respected in the rest of the world, apart from the Russophobes in Europe and the neocons in the US. Also, the Orthodox Christian Church is thriving and growing, and Putin is promoting Christian values, but not to the exclusion of Islam, because it has a large Muslim population. Their rights and ways of living are respected and flourish. It's just doing really, really well. However, the Guardian and the Financial Times and the BBC and the Economist tell us otherwise. It's going to collapse. They've got no money. The businesses are folding, and what was it in April 2022? They were having to cannibalize washing machines because their military.
These are all lies, absolute inventions. This is ridiculous. Russian economy is not going to collapse. In fact, the Western economists are looking at the expansion of industry because of militarization, and they say, "Oh, we should do the same." And let me tell you, those who think that you could do this, you are not going to be able to do the same. And this is why. Because these were the Soviet factories that were dormant. It's not like they built them in a couple of years.
Right.
The Soviet Union was building military facilities for decades. And that what it explains that now that they were needed, they just relaunched them and expanded them. That's why Russia is producing more drones and more artillery shells than the United States and Europe combined. And it's because they didn't need those military things, but when you do need them, they just relaunched them and expanded them. Russia has always had a very, very good scientific basis for military industry. They put into it. I mean, they didn't know how to produce shoes and automobiles for consumers, but they did know how to produce the best tanks and military aircraft. Now based on Sukhoi military aircraft, they relaunched commercial civilian aircraft. So Russia is a relatively small country of 150 million people.
A relatively small country. You mean in terms of population, not in terms of size,
population.
Right?
But you see, the productive forces of a country are in its population, not its territory. But a country of 150 million people who can produce their own airplanes, who exports more energy than any other country except the United States, who exports more grain for the rest of than any other country, more than the United States. It's the champion, even without Ukraine. And when Ukraine was a part of Russia, it was unreachable a champion for the rest of the world. So it can feed itself. It has its energy. It has a very sophisticated electronic industry. It has some weapon system that the Americans don't have, and they don't want to talk about it. But in terms of missiles and hypersonics and electronics and all kinds of things. So what I say, and people in the West don't like to hear it, for the first time in 500 years, Russia does not need anything from the West. Russia has always been oriented to the West. It wanted to be a part of the West. Now there's this break, which actually the West engineered, not Russia. Putin tried very hard to be a part of the West and to be a part of Russia. At one point, he even wanted to join NATO. It's the West that rejected him. But we can talk about foreign policy later. The way that the Russians think of themselves now is that they are a civilization in their own right, and they're increasingly interested in joining India and China as a kind of a rock, BRICS, RIC. It started from RIC, Russia, India, China, around which there will be other countries that would join in their system. They're beginning to think of a new currency, a new payment system to be independent of SWIFT. It's like a complete break with the West. But again, this is not Putin's doing. This is the result of hostile actions by the West since the Ukrainian war.
Yes.
So domestically, this is what I was trying to tell you, Rich. Putin would stay in power because he would be elected and reelected because people like him. And in fact, I'm beginning to worry what's going to happen after him, because everybody's so used to him being in control. How are they going to manage to run a country and define its priorities when he's gone? He's my age. He's about 75. So we'll see.
Well, from my take, perhaps another conversation for some other time is the relationship between Britain and Russia. How Britain and the Europeans in particular wanted to break up Russia. Russia's too big, really, because they want the $75 trillion worth of resources in Russia, all that gold and tungsten and nickel and aluminium and that land. I just want to share, if I may, my own personal experience of Russia, and then I'm going to ask you another question. So in 2018, I had the joy of visiting Irkutsk, and it's a 2-hour flight from London to Moscow, and then it was 6 hours from Moscow to Irkutsk, and I was only halfway across the country. I was like, what? Right? It's massive. And then this was in November. And I was going to go and visit a Bitcoin mining farm. And the friend I was going with, I said to him, look, are there going to be hotels available? Hotel spaces? He goes, nobody goes to Siberia in November. We'll be all right. So we step out. I step out 9 o'clock in the morning in Irkutsk. It's minus 23 degrees. And I'd been in Pakistan in June earlier that year, and it was plus 40 degrees, my kind of weather. Like, what the hell is this Punjabi doing in Siberia in November, right? It's like, whoa, that was something else. And then I said to my wife 3 or 4 years ago, because I see what was developing, I said, we need to move. We need to move to Russia. Now, Russia's not, I don't know if that's changed, but it's not easy to emigrate to. And it's a very, very different language and different alphabet. And I couldn't find anywhere that was warm all the year round. But then I found Dagestan.
Yeah, Dagestan is beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's warmer than London all the year round. But my wife is not convinced.
There are a lot of foreigners who move to Russia now. That's another interesting topic. Some of them write to me. I had a letter from a priest from America who moved to Moscow because he likes the religious revival of religion. There are many from Europe, from Germany. From Germany, a lot of farmers are moving to Russia, just like in the 18th century, because land is plentiful and cheap, and they start the agriculture, which is in Germany is very expensive, and taxes and all kinds of obstacles. Anyway, there are quite a few of Europeans and Americans who are now moving to Russia, and they have an agency for this, and they invite people of Russian origin to move back. But anyway, that's a separate.
Well, my wife is Scottish and I'm Pakistani. I don't know how that will go, right? So anyway, she's not convinced. But one of the things about Russia that we hear a lot about, and of course, I know what's in the Guardian, the BBC, and the Economist, and CNN is all perfectly true about Russia, is the political persecution. Look what they did to Navalny. And then, of course, how they killed the Skripals, who just disappeared, funnily enough, right? I don't want to go into the Skripals now, but what a complete sham that was. But about the persecution, and there's no freedom of speech, and then the FSB will lock you up and throw you into a gulag somewhere.
No. Let me address this issue in the time we have. So this is this is about the freedom. Of course, I wouldn't say there's a complete freedom of speech in Russia, but there is a certain amount. Let me give you an example. There was a radio station in Moscow, which is called the Echo of Moscow, and it was it's closed now, but it was an opposition voice that really was very critical of Putin all the time. And the chief editor of it is Venediktov. And I subscribe to him on YouTube, and he's still speaking. And on YouTube, he's available. And he lives in Moscow, and he does speak out. And there are radio stations that put him on. But when they do put him on Russian television, for example, some channels do, there is a sign that says, you are now going to listen to the foreign agent. Now,
Right.
What does this mean, foreign agent? Foreign agent is what they designed to put on the speakers of those who, at some point in the past, received money from the West. And he did, because USAID spent millions in Russia, just as they did in Ukraine, on giving grants to various quote unquote democracy outlets, building democracy and so forth. And a lot of these organizations were actually giving grants, not expecting much for it. But that's why if he received money from the West, he's not banned, he's not imprisoned, he's not tortured, nothing of the sort. He simply say, this is the guy who received money from. But they continue to broadcast. Latinina is another one who I listen to regularly, and she's again a critic of Putin. These are the pro-Western Navalny types. Now, again, about Navalny is a separate topic. There is a lot of suspicion in Russia, at least, that he was killed by the British.
Yes.
And a
I've
big
come
proof
across that
that
analysis.
Putin didn't kill him, because if Putin wanted to kill him, they would have killed him. But why would he release him to Germany? And the Germans keep the medical records and refuse to release those. It doesn't make any sense. If the FSB wanted to get rid of him, they would not have let him go to Germany. And then he could have stayed in Germany, but then he preferred to go back and make some political point, and then he was killed. So this is a very strange story. But about the opposition in Russia, if you criticize Putin and say Putin is a dictator and he should be removed, you will be arrested. That's impossible. You can't say that. But if you criticize Putin's policies, and if you say you need to do more on this and less on that, the Communist Party does it all the time. I read Pravda, and I see that this is a real opposition in terms of domestic social policies. Now, the communists are just as eager and patriotic and as Putin is in terms of the Ukraine war policy. But the criticism of Putin, it comes from the nationalists. They are the ones who criticize Putin that he's not going fast enough, that there should be the war should accelerate, that we should win quicker, we should take Odessa. In other words, there's a lot of criticism of Putin's policy, even about the war, but from the direction of more energetic. They want more energetic pursuit of the war, and they don't want any compromise, as Putin seems to be willing to do with Trump. So bottom line is, there is opposition in Russia, both left and right in West European terms, domestic foreign policy and foreign policy, and those that are completely openly inimical to Putin are not arrested. They function, they exist, they broadcast with a label foreign agent.
Right. Okay. And then I heard this thing that there was a referendum a few years ago where Putin wanted to decentralize power away from Moscow. But the people didn't want that. The people wanted Putin to have more power. Have I got that correct, or?
No, I don't think that's correct. It was not that he wanted to move it from Moscow. I think there was a debate about the extent of powers that the governors have and the federal agents controlling several provinces. And there was a very interesting, speaking of that, there was a very interesting clash of, in fact, Putin himself and Khabarovsk in Siberia. They had a governor who was very popular, but he was corrupt. And when Putin tried to remove him, well, not Putin personally, but federal authorities tried to remove him, there were demonstrations in Khabarovsk in defense of their governor, because he must have done, pretty popular things. But and there was a time when there were people in Khabarovsk protesting against Putin because he wanted to remove their governor. But the governor was corrupt, and the federal authorities did arrest him, despite the local opposition. So there were all kinds of interesting cases. But no, I don't think so. No, it would be wrong to say that Putin wanted to decentralize. In fact, his whole achievement is that he created this federal structure, as he called it, the vertical of power, which is a system of federal central control over the locals, because the locals are usually the ones where there is corruption and cozy deals and so forth. And I think that's pretty much, as a political scientist would say, that's the same thing in any country, because local people are the ones who know each other and who make deals, and it's the central authority that has to monitor it and stop it if it can.
Right. Okay. And just when I was in Irkutsk, I spoke to a Spanish guy who had married a Russian woman and settled in Irkutsk, and he was telling me how much and how well Putin had cleaned up the corruption in Russia, where government actually was clean and had supplanted the local mafia that were running everything. He said it became possible to do business because it wasn't possible before, because you had to give kickbacks to the local gangsters. So it does seem rather remarkable. And from my take, if I set aside the anti-Russian propaganda that pervades the British and European psyche in mainstream media, then I can see Putin's actually been done really, really well for Russia and the Russian people, as is the job of any leader should be. And please, dear God, can we have our own Putin-like figure instead of who we have in the UK, Keir Starmer, who's a complete traitor to the British citizenry and isn't serving them at all. Vladimir, it's been wonderful talking to you. There's so much more to talk about Russia, foreign relations, how it's perceived in in Africa, Russia and Ukraine war, and then Russia and Britain's relationship, and America and Russia, China arc, and Russia and the United States. So I do look forward to having you back on. You will be back on. And everybody, please follow Vladimir, his YouTube channel. He does some great analysis. And let us know what you found interesting, and what do you think? If you are one of Putin's puppets, please say so in the comments. And if you're not, let us know. Did Putin make you comment or not? This is Richard Vladimir signing out. All the best. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.